Hey folks, back with another video. Let's dive into what stories got my attention today. Starting with the Australian uh, Defence Force news, there is a credible information, quote unquote, to substantiate allegations that Australian Special Forces troops unlawfully killed 39 prisoners and civilians during the Afghan conflict. A 4-year inquiry into the alleged Australian war crimes has found. Now, Australian Defence Force Chief Angus Campbell apologized to the people of Afghanistan, quote, for any wrongdoing by Australian soldiers, end quote, ahead of the release of the damning report on Thursday. Now, the inquiry by the Inspector General of the Australian Defence Force investigated 57 incidents and heard from more than 400 witnesses. It uncovered, quote, deeply disturbing allegations of unlawful killings, end quote, and inhuman treatment of detainees in Afghanistan from 2005 to 2016. Justice Paul Brereton, quote, found there to be credible information to substantiate 23 incidents of alleged unlawful killings of 39 people by 25 Australian Special Forces personnel, predominantly from the Special Air Service Regiment, quote unquote, Campbell told reporters in Canberra. Campbell said that some of the 25 are still serving in the Defence Force. He said none of the killings could be, quote, described as being in the heat of battle, end quote. The inquiry looked into the period between 2005 to 2016. The report states that some of the incidents took place in 2009 and 2010, with the majority occurring in the later years of 2012 to 2013. Now, the report recommends a total of 23 incidents involving 19 people be referred to the Australian Federal Police for criminal investigation. Morrison called Afghan President Ashraf Ghani ahead of the report's release to express, quote, his deepest sorrow over the misconduct of some Australian troops, end quote, and told him investigations would be conducted to ensure justice. Australia's Foreign Minister, Marise Payne, had also written to her counterpart in Afghanistan to apologize for the misconduct identified by the inquiry. Afghanistan's presidential palace tweeted late Wednesday. In the letter, Payne said Defence Force Chief Angus Campbell was, quote, considering the inquiry's extensive findings and recommendations and will make public statements subsequently, end quote. Australia deployed troops to Afghanistan after the September 11 attacks in 2001 on its ally, the United States. Around 1,550 personnel currently remain in the country. At the end of it all, I am confident that the Australian government will do justice in this case. One must remember that war is a messy business. However, we must not give up our ideals which we have inherited from, namely the Enlightenment and of course the Judeo-Christian traditions. Of course, making amends when we have wronged someone is a cornerstone of any just system. Moving on, the Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Group said Wednesday that China's imposition of new rules to disqualify elected legislators in Hong Kong appeared to be part of a campaign to silence critics and called on Beijing to reverse course. Quote, we urge the Chinese central authorities to reconsider their actions against Hong Kong's elected legislature and immediately reinstate the Legislative Council members, end quote. The foreign ministers from Australia, Britain, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States said in a joint statement. Hong Kong had expelled 4 opposition members from its legislature last week after Beijing gave city authorities new powers to curb dissent. The move triggered mass resignation by Hong Kong's pro-democracy opposition lawmakers, something that I had covered in the previous videos. Now, it also raised further alarm in the West about the level of Hong Kong's autonomy promised under a one country, two system formula when Britain ended its colonial rule and handed Hong Kong back to China in 1997. Britain now considers China has broken the joint declaration three times, including with the national security legislation for Hong Kong introduced this year. Washington has already imposed sanctions on Hong Kong's chief executive Carrie Lam and other Chinese officials over the crackdown and has warned of further steps. China denies curbing rights and freedoms in the global financial hub, but authorities in Hong Kong and Beijing have moved swiftly to stifle dissent after anti-government protests flared in June last year and plunged the city into crisis. Now, all of the mess in Hong Kong can be squarely put in the lap of Xi Jinping, who has ruled to consolidate his control of the country and is moving to expand control beyond the borders of the country. I believe he is pushing his regime to a breaking point if he continues in this path. It won't be some external push against him, it will be the internally he would have thinned his resources. Let's just say he would have overstretched. Anyhow, moving over to Uganda, the death toll from protests over the arrest of Ugandan opposition presidential hopeful and musician Bobby Wine has risen to 7, police said Thursday, as the second day of the demonstrations began, something I had covered, I believe, in the last video. Now, Kampala Metropolitan Police spokesman Patrick Onyanga said the toll is likely to rise after more than 30 people were injured during the protests Wednesday in different parts of the East African country. Now, protests resumed for a second day in the capital, Kampala, with protests blocking roads and burning tires. Police and army have deployed heavily in the capital to stop the protests that broke out after Wine was arrested. Wine, who has been arrested many times in recent years, has captured the imagination of many Ugandans with his persistent calls for President Yoweri Museveni to retire after 36 years in power. The election is early next year. Now, of course, the lust for power can and does blind those who get in the power, considering the fact that he's been in that seat for 36 years. That lust for power is like the song of the sirens. Now, Uganda is, in my opinion, headed for a rocky election come next year. I'll keep an eye on the situation in Uganda and see how it plays out and who wins the election. Moving on, Peru's millennial and Generation Z youth have their eyes on bigger prizes, such as changes to the constitution and reforming a widely reviled Congress. Peru's younger generation, dubbed the bicentennials in reference to the 200-year anniversary of the Peruvian independence next year, were at the heart of recent protests that led to the resignation of country's interim president on Sunday. The appointment of socially liberal lawmaker Francisco Sagasti on Tuesday, Peru's third president in just over a week, has restored some calm, but the crisis has ignited wider anger at the country's political classes and rampant corruption. Now, particular, let's just say, the corruption and the ire of the people could see Peru follow in the footsteps of Andean neighbor Chile, which, in the wake of fiery street demonstrations last year, is now rewriting its constitution. Now, the protests were sparked by the abrupt removal in an impeachment trial on November 9th of popular centrist leader Martin Vizcarra by an opposition-led Congress, many of whom had been angered by Vizcarra's anti-graft measures. Young Peruvians rallied against the lawmakers as corrupt, waving banners calling for constitutional change. Peru's bicentennials could be crucial in the April election. Those between 20 to 34 years of age make up about 40% of those of mandatory voting age, official figures show. Now, they've grown up in a rapidly changing Peru, which has seen years of strong economic growth on the back of mining exports and given them access to communication tools and information their parents could never have imagined. Now, over half of those aged 18 to 24 said that they took part in various anti government protests this month, whether by marching or pot banging in the streets, a poll by think tank IEP showed. Now, that compared to a third of those aged over 40. Some 90% of the Peruvian polls said they disapproved of Congress, and 65% did not identify with any political party, which is a potentially volatile mix as the economy battles a deep contraction after being hit by the the pandemic, let's just say. Now, Reuters spoke to over a dozen Peruvians, mostly in their 20s, who vowed to keep protesting until the country's leaders agreed to real change. Gathering in Lima's Plaza San Martin earlier this week, they were draped in red and white flags and bearing signs saying bicentennials. Many said they wanted to see Peru's unicameral Congress overhauled. Others wanted a new constitution to replace what they described as an illegitimate Magna Carta created by former strongman President Alberto Fujimori in 1993, before many of them were born. Most did not fully witness the violence of Fujimori's government, but have seen one president after another become embroiled in corruption scandals. But challenges remain. The movement as of yet has no visible leaders, and anyone under 25 is too young to run for Congress themselves. The protests also met with fierce resistance from security forces who were widely criticized by human rights organizations for use of excessive force. There are ongoing investigations, and none of the political parties have made targeting young voters a cornerstone of their strategy so far. But Peru's youth has demographics on its side. Peru's youths want a change to the system that is meaningful to them. However, there are other concerns that the youth seem not to take into account, which will resist the change that they want, namely the old interests, the institutional and bureaucratic slow process designed to make sure that any change is slow and resisted in order to make sure that there is a smooth transition and to avoid too much changes at once. At the end, the youth, I believe, has to learn to negotiate with the power that be and learn to make changes that are meaningful and sustainable. Moving on to Thailand, the Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha said on Thursday that all laws would be used against protesters who break them as demonstrations escalate, for his removal and for reforms to curb the powers of King Maha Vajiralongkorn. The activists voiced concern that this could mean the resumption of prosecutions under some of the world's harshest royal insult laws. The protests are the greatest challenge to Thailand's establishment in years and have broken a long-standing taboo by criticizing the monarchy, which can carry a jail term of up to 15 years. Prayut's announcement came a day after thousands of protesters threw paint at Thai police headquarters in what they said was a response to the use of water cannon and tear gas that hurt dozens on Tuesday, the most violent. Let me repeat that sentence again. The Prayut's announcement came a day after thousands of protests threw paint at Thai police headquarters, something that I did cover in the news in my previous videos, in what they said was a response to the use of water cannon and tear gas that hurt dozens on Tuesday, the most violent day of protests since July. Some protesters also sprayed anti-monarchy graffiti. Although the royal palace has not commenced on the protest, the king recently referred to Thailand as a quote, land of compromise, end quote, a phrase that has been treated with scorn by protesters. And I believe that they shouldn't. The compromise is not a bad thing, in my opinion. Anyhow, outraged by anti-monarchy graffiti at Wednesday's demonstration, some royalists called for the application of Article 112 in posts on social media. The harsh, how should I say it? In fact, the harshest law regarding insulting the monarchy. Now, dozens of protesters, including many of the most prominent leaders, have been arrested on a variety of charges in recent months, though not for criticizing the monarchy. A major protest is planned at the Crown Property Bureau on November 25th over the management of the palace fortune, which the king has taken into his personal control. Now, the fund is valued in the tens of billions of dollars. Protesters said there would be 7 more days of demonstrations after that. As of yet, I cannot see both sides backing down. Over the months, the protesters have increased their demands while the government has been trying to appease the protests by calling the parliament in session to discuss some, let's just say, modest proposal. However, as long as the protests continue, the pressure will be built on the government. But on the other side, if the government can do a few reform and shows a sign of trying to be reasonable, then they can appeal to the people who are neutral. Now let's see how this whole situation progresses in Thailand. Well, that's it for this video. If you liked the video, then hit that like button and hit that subscribe button for future updates. Write in the comment sections your thoughts, criticisms, and anything I might have missed. And I will see you in the next video.